G'day, folks. Peter Stefanovic is my name. I'm a journalist and I'm host of Sky News First Edition. I'd like to welcome you, if you don't know already, and introduce you to Anthony Dowsley and Pat Carline, two terrific award-winning reporters, some of the best in the business, actually, who followed Lawyer X and Nicola Gobbo really closer than anybody over the last couple of years, and they've broken the story. They've done documentaries, and now they've written a terrific book about it, which we're going to be selling to you now, basically. In a book launch, it's very different. We'd like to be together in a studio, but given what's going on at the moment, especially with Pat and Anthony, they're in lockdown in Victoria at the moment, so they can't be outside. And so I'm coming to you live from Sydney as well. So welcome, Anthony and Pat. Good to see you.
Thanks,
Peter.
First to you, Anthony. Book's out. Congratulations. Are you relieved? How are you feeling?
Oh, it is a relief because it's been so long to get to this point. The story began, as we've said it many times, it began around about 2013-14 when this sort of, it emerged that there was an issue here with Nicola Gobbo being a secret spy for police and someone who had sort of run with the criminals before running with the police and then running with both at different times. And now here we are 7 years later with a book, a Royal Commission, and reports coming out about what exactly happened.
Yeah, we'll pick through all of those one by one, but just Pat, over to you. How do you look back on your time on this case, on this story?
Well, it's something that, in 25 years of journalism, there hasn't been an epic issue or scandal like this. Certainly in my career. And Anthony, as you said, he broke the story back in 2014. I got involved, I think, in about 2017. And it's been all-consuming. You've had the Royal Commission, in recent months, and there's been new revelations almost at times, day to day, week to week, from a story that Anthony sort of originally got as a tip-off in a pub back in, I think, the end of 2013. So it's been a very long journey, certainly.
Okay, we'll just go back to that tip-off, Anthony. Just explain that for our viewers and our listeners tonight. That was really the start of the story. Just describe, how it was broken to you and what you did about that.
Well, it was a vague tip-off regarding Nicola Gobbo and a police officer who it was believed by a lot of policemen back then that she had an affair and potentially a love child with this man. That was a bit of a tawdry rumour that made me think more about what had led to this rumour. And when you picked away everything, the history of Nicola Gobbo and how she had been sort of in the eye of police for so long, all it took was some questions to sort of reveal what lay beneath all of this contact. And that's what happened for about a month and a half to 2 months before the story emerged.
You're dealing with some interesting figures, if we can put it that way, it's a pretty murky world that you're involved in there, Anthony. Just describe that, and also Nicola Gobbo. What sort of a person was she?
Well, it became clear that she was a risk taker. That she had been a crew member, if for want of a better word, with the likes of Tony Mockbell and Carl Williams, but many others that were beneath them. She was very close to them from a period from 2000 and sort of 2 onwards, even earlier. And it took a bit of diving in to even go further back in her history, back to her basically university years, to find that she had a track record of popping up in all sorts of criminal activity, not necessarily being part of it, but just being there. Being someone who was either the alibi or the person that was acting for them, or the person that was just on the phone all the time, doing things that you wouldn't expect a normal lawyer to do, until eventually she became a police recruit.
Yeah. Well, she's sort of a modern day double agent, Pat, would you say? How would you describe her?
Well, look, obviously she's was a defence barrister who happened to be a police informer at the same time, which is, as far as we know, there is no other example of that in the world ever. The way I sort of look at it, given back in 1995, she became a police informer for the first time. She was still a law student at the University of Melbourne. And I sort of tend to think of her now more as a police informer who happened to use the cloak, if you like, of a defence barrister to actually pursue that great passion of hers, which I think, going back through the documentation, she was obsessed with police and with the notion of informing. At one point, she was actually thinking about doing a thesis back in 1997 or whenever about police informing and about the dangers and that sort of thing. That's what she sort of set out to do in retrospect, rather than, she said she wanted to be a QC, she said she wanted to be a judge, but she was actually more wrapped up in the informing, officially or otherwise, way back in 1995 when she was still a student.
Yeah, so she enjoyed, playing people off, rather than actually being a lawyer.
Look, she's a very complex character. I think she's, Anthony's met her. I've never met her. She's gregarious. She's eager to please. I'm sure if you met her at the bar, she'd be terrific company. But at the same time, she's a very solitary figure. She lived this life as a secret informer for up to 15 years on and off. And nobody in her world, even her closest family and friends, had any idea. I mean, the truth of her existence is something that she hid from everybody, not just people in the legal fraternity, but her closest confidants.
Do you reckon she has any remorse, Anthony?
I think that she has some regrets about the position that she's in now. She'll forever be on the run in some way. And I think that she wishes that she didn't make the decisions she did. But the pathway to her own destruction, as Patrick was just sort of pointing out, is that she was making the decisions to becoming an informer. She thrilled to that life. She wanted to play people off, like you said. She wanted to be wanted, is another way of putting it. And having met her, deception is something she was extremely good at, or deflection. And that's what I picked up on my one meeting with her.
Well, just describe that meeting. Where was it? When was it? And what were the particulars around it?
Well, I'd spoken to her a few times around about the time of the story, before and afterwards. And it was intriguing how she was sort of treating the whole issue, sort of pretending that she wanted to come on board with the newspaper and expose all of this. But at the very moment she was on the phone telling us that, she was actually with police being sort of scurried away into protection, which shows how her thought patterns work. From then on, there was a number of months later when we finally got to catch up, and I had a colleague there, and we basically just talked about how this had come about, whether she knew she was informer. She said she had no idea. There was no straight out denial, other than at the point where I got to the sort of meaty end of the conversation after an hour or so, maybe a few hours. And I just put it to her that what her registration was, her number, and how many times she'd told police. I knew the number of reports by then. And she looked pretty shocked at that. I don't think she even knew what her own registration number was.
Well, so how would you describe that look? Was she stumped? Did the blood rush from her face? That she was kind of sprung.
There was a reaction, but I think she was a pretty good poker player, and she was just very good at deflection. And I don't think that she. Obviously, there would have been lies. I can't remember the conversation exactly. She was basically feigning that she didn't ignorance. But at the same time, sort of telling me that it was a great story. And what registered in my head was, well, if it's a great story and you're telling me it's wrong, it's not a great story. I'm probably going to lose my job. But I knew by then it wasn't wrong. We obviously, we'd been through court processes by then. We knew exactly what we were talking about.
Yeah. Pat, where is she now? Do we know? Anyone know?
Look, I don't know the answer. If I did, I couldn't say. There have been reports that she's overseas and essentially stateless, in the sense that she's afraid of coming back to Australia, obviously for her own sort of welfare, but also she's got 2 kids now, and it has been threatened over the years. I mean, there's court processes, going through the past decade, really, one way or another. She is concerned that at a threat that was made at some point, I think about 2015, that her children could be removed from her, by the Department of Human Services for their own safety. And look, as a mother and as parents, that is a big motivator for staying away and for worrying about where you're going to go. And as Anthony said, I mean, she's sort of condemned to this sentence of purgatory almost. She's not friends with the police. The criminals have finally had the full story exposed of what she did to them and how she deceived them. So I think she's in a pretty hard place and will be for a very long time.
And Pat, do you reckon, is she looking at legal trouble? Could she face charges?
Look, it's possible. The Royal Commission basically last week came down with recommendations which will eventually lead to the final recommendations of the Royal Commission. Now, that brought in questions of misconduct by police officers, from former Chief Commissioner Simon Overland down. There's a lot of officers there, sort of with an asterisk next to their name, if you like, at the moment. That Royal Commission found that her evidence to that was evasive and potentially unhelpful. And there's always been questions about whether, in the course of her lawyering, in helping the likes of Tony Mockbell and say Carl Williams as well to avoid prosecution, that she may have actually set about perverting the course of justice in doing that, in the sense that, take Tony Mockbell, she would act for his associates and underlings, and she was acting potentially to protect Tony Mockbell rather than doing the right thing by that particular client. So these are all questions that are up in the air, but certainly the notion of criminality is not far away.
Well, I'll just we've got some viewer questions, some reader questions that I'll ask you in a sec. But you brought up Tony Mockbell there, Pat. What's his future? Is he going to be out of jail soon?
Look, a lot of close observers, fine legal minds, think that he has a case to at least appeal some of his convictions. Because basically Nicola Gobbo was his lawyer and she was actively working against his best interests by telling the police the ins and outs of what he was doing at the time. And then she went on to represent him. In 2006, she represented him in court. And at the same time, she was telling the police, what his legal strategies were and how he's thinking and what he wanted to do. Certainly, I don't think Tony Mockbell is going to be free next week or next month, but a lot of people think he will be freed or at least get bail or get retrials in the course of time. Now, justice is very slow. I mean, you're probably talking years, I suspect.
Well, especially with what's going on at COVID at the moment too. Wasn't there some kind of affair? There might have been some kind of affair, Anthony, that might have happened between them. Did that happen? Well,
there's always this, when it comes to Nicola, there's lots of rumours of affairs, police in particular, that sort of followed her. Whether they are all true or not is hard to say. But I've asked the question through some of Mockbell's people, and it's generally denied that there was any affair. But they were very close. They lived near each other at one point in time. There's this interesting sort of plays where on the morning that Jason Moran is shot, the infamous figure in Melbourne, alongside a bodyguard of his, Nicola is being taken to the airport by Tony Mockbell, just by coincidence on that morning, probably setting up an alibi for Tony Mockbell, you'd imagine. It's just there's phone calls made to her by the Carl Williams and his associate on the way to a blood clinic, which was another alibi that they were doing. And it all seems to surround Nicola on that day, which was in June 2003, and was what emerged from that day was the real start of Gangland, is a very public shooting at an Auskick clinic in Melbourne where there was kids everywhere. There was kids in the van where Jason Moran was watching the football. He was just about to leave with them. And that's the day that, even though Gangland existed by then, Gangland really kicked off as in the public eye.
That's right. Okay, let's go to one of our reader questions. First of all, this one would be for you, Anthony, because you've met her. This is from Jane. Strangely, she says she feels a bit sad for her, Nicola Gobbo, that is. We spoke a bit about your meeting, but Jane asks, is Nicola Gobbo actually a likeable person?
She's very sociable. She's talkative. She's particularly good at sort of the language of the street, I guess. That's how she was able to be someone that you would probably want to have a beer with. She's entertaining, you would say. But during her life, if you knew her well, I think you'd probably find that maybe you didn't know her that well. You'd feel that there was probably something missing. I didn't know her very well. I met her just that once, so it's hard for me to say. But with feeling some sort of sympathy or empathy for her, that's very easy to feel now, I think, because she is a mother who has children. Her life is spiraled out of control. It's very much been at her own. She's been the master of that destiny in many ways, because she was making the decision that she wanted to play all of these different sides, be in conflict, and end up being where she is. It was always going to end here, and it wasn't really the story that ended up with her being here. She was receiving many, many death threats prior to any media coverage about this at all.
Well, that leads us to our next question. This one's for you, Pat. Do you believe that Nicola Gobbo is in seriously grave danger and will be for the rest of her life? Or has the anger of the underworld calmed with time and the demise of its key players?
Look, it's a critical question, that one. It was one that we've discussed many times over. She was getting death threats almost daily through the years of 2007 and 8. But she managed that, obviously. She got through that. She made an interesting point when Anthony's first story appeared, and this came out much later on. She said that these kinds of criminals like to have 100% proof that they'd been deceived before they acted on it. And that's basically what has happened over the course since about 2018 onwards in all these inquiries and secret trials and now the Royal Commission. They actually have the full story now. They understand what she did and how she did it. And you could argue that that puts her in incredibly grave risk because they now know exactly what happened. And, some of them, are very hot-headed. Some of them aren't very nice people. I think she's definitely in grave danger, and I can't see any mechanism for that shifting in a massive way at any stage in the foreseeable future. She can't say sorry. She can't rewrite it. She's presented a sort of a victim-type sort of narrative in discussing her situation, and I think there's plenty of room for sympathy. Absolutely, because
I would have thought that the underworld never forgets.
Oh, well, that's certainly true of the mafia, obviously. And I think, there are blokes, and they're all blokes, who went to jail for a very long time. Now, to suggest that they were completely innocent and wrongly convicted because they hadn't committed crimes might be a bit of a stretch. But the way that they were put away with Nicola Gobbo's assistance to police is certainly grounds for legally having convictions overturned and compensation and all sorts of things. I mean, this is going to be going on for years and years as it plays out through the justice system.
Well, that was Andrew. Thanks, Andrew, for that question. And this one back to you, Anthony, because we're sort of on this topic now. Are any of the men who are in prison actually innocent? Is there a chance that any of the tomato tin ecstasy fellas are innocent as well? I think that might be Rob Karam, that one. But are any of the men who are in prison actually innocent?
Well, like they say, if anyone's watched Shawshank Redemption, everyone in prison's innocent. They say they are. There's no one that I've come across. I've never called this an innocence project, per se, because it's clear, and it has been since day one, that there was lots of evidence brought to the table, much of it by Nicola Gobbo, but many other reasons, a lot of other evidence as well that added to the convictions of all these people. But when your primary source is the lawyer that's acting for you, it's a terrible situation to get yourself in, Victoria Police, to not realise that if this ever was exposed, all of those convictions would be unsafe. And here we are today, and they are. So is there anyone in prison that was innocent? Well, people like Farouk Orman say they were innocent. He was released last year in 2019. I wouldn't know what he did or didn't do. And that's the clear answer to that one. I know that there are people within the Tomato Tin syndicate. All of them have big histories, but some of them say they weren't involved with that, bringing 15 million ecstasy pills into Australia in 2007. Is anyone innocent of that? There was a lot of evidence, so I wouldn't like to say that.
Okay, thanks, Dingo, for that question. Pat, back to you now. This question's from Jerome. Do you reckon the TV series Underbelly had any impact on how the real people in Gangland and the cops as well saw themselves and behaved?
Look, I think there was such an odd celebrity that came attached to the whole Gangland thing. I mean, as we were talking about earlier, the Jason Moran killing in 2003 really thrust it into the public eye and got people talking about it and put a lot of pressure on the police because suddenly people are being whacked at junior football clinics. It's like, hang on, this has got to stop. But what came with that as well was this odd sort of celebrity that for the likes of Carl Williams and certainly Tony Mockbell when he fled the country and was hiding out in Greece and got found wearing that wig backwards, as we all know. The celebrity thing, it is odd and it's hard to explain because it doesn't make a lot of sense. You're not talking about good people. You're not talking about role models. You're not talking about good deeds. You're talking about really ugly, grotty fights about drugs. That's what it amounts to. Now, having said that, you've got you had Mark Chopper Reed. He's written plenty of books, obviously. That probably sort of started the celebrity industry in criminals, if you like. Mick Gatto, the great survivor of the Gangland sort of years, wrote his autobiography, and it was a bestseller in about 2010. Against that, Carl Williams wrote about Underbelly in one of his letters from jail, and he actually made the point. He said, I think about 5% of what I watched, it actually happened. And there's some great characters in the Underbelly series, very, very well acted, very well, portrayed, but they weren't necessarily true to life. But it certainly did drive the whole celebrity thing.
Because you're both, in this world and have been in this world for a while to get to the heart of the matter. There's been previous instances where journalists have written about the underworld and they've had their lives threatened and all the rest of it. I'll start with you, Anthony. Were you ever threatened throughout the course of your reporting on this story?
Not on this story. I've been threatened over other stories, but this one is sort of area in between where the criminal underworld more intrigued than they are threatened by it. The only people that could be threatened by it would be criminals who became informers, and I haven't obviously heard from any of them, but they would feel somewhat shaky given what has been coming out throughout the Royal Commission. No one wants to be unravelled or revealed like that. And that's the story of Nicola Gobbo as well, because there was years and years of fighting in court about whether this should be told or not, whether this was fair to risk her life by a court, eventually the High Court coming to a decision that her life had to be protected, but it was up to her to take steps to protect it with Victoria Police, and this issue had to be dealt with publicly.
Pat, what about you? Did you ever get any midnight phone calls with no one on the other end, or any bullets in the letterbox or anything like that?
No, I just hid behind Anthony, Peter. I came to this a bit later on, I think probably about 3 years ago, and it did sort of strike me. Anthony took me out to meet lots of criminals and lots of police officers and lots of lawyers, and I got to know a large number of them. And at times it was hard to know which was which at times. Because, some of the police officers and I'm not thinking of anyone specifically, but some of them were so angry and so upset by the course of events Whereas some of the criminals are actually quite wise and quite serene in their sort of, take on it all. But no, look, in terms of threats, no, I haven't copped anything on this one at all.
Okay. Let's go back to a reader question. Let's go back to this name has been withheld, but the question is, my sister was friends with Nicola Gobbo a long time ago, and she used to brag to my sister about the number of people she was having affairs with. My question is, how much do you think this all has to do with sex? Anthony, you answer that one.
I was hoping that one would be for Patrick.
You go for it, mate.
Well, it's a double-barreled question, so Pat, I'll send the next one to you.
There is a narrative. There is a theme that Nicola created with. She was generally a single woman for most of her time. She dated some police officers. She had a lifestyle which involved burning the candle at both ends, and that probably harnessed some of the speculation and the affairs that she openly had and has spoken about at the Royal Commission with officers from the AFP and from Victoria Police and so forth. They were things that, I can't say she bragged about them, but people knew about them, and people in her own industry, in the legal industry, also have spoken to me about some of those issues surrounding the sex life. But it wasn't the important issue, but it was a way, I think sexuality was a way in which she was able to gravitate to criminals. It seems to me that none of them admit affairs. They've gone on the stand to say that there was just very close friendships. Whether you can believe them or not, I tend not to believe all of those stories. I believe that there was some, intimate relationships between criminals and Nicola Gobbo. She is now the partner of a criminal, Richard Barco. So she has two children, I think, with him. So there is that theme all the way through that this sexuality was a ploy in some ways, or a sort of a call out.
Well, that was the second part of the question, Pat. Do you think she was seeing all these guys just for the pillow talk?
No, I don't think so. I think she was an accumulator of knowledge, and she liked that forbidden knowledge, which she could then dispense as she saw fit. She went to a school down here in Melbourne called Genazzano College, which is, and she's the same age as me, same year. And I knew a lot of her classmates at that time. And they talk about her. She was going to nightclubs very early on. She came, from a very respectable background family, obviously. Her uncle, went on to be governor of Victoria. But she sort of seemed to have almost a double life back then. She was going to nightclubs. There was a lot of talk about her hooking up with celebrities back when she was in year 12 and that sort of time in her life. And from what the girls say from that time now, she enjoyed the notoriety. And I think she's always been drawn to notoriety. And I think the question of sex, it certainly was a weapon. I don't think it's something we necessarily have to dwell on at great length, but there would have been a lot of very, very private discussions on pillows, as a consequence of the way she led her life. And that goes back to, and I think the other big point is, as she's talked about, her father died when she was in year 12, which, as it would be for all of us, is catastrophic to her thinking. And she sort of, a bit like a moth to a flame, sort of looked for men who could be father figures to her. And I think that probably is as an important a theme as the sex theme in trying to understand it.
Well, just on the family thing, Anthony, what's her relationship now with the rest of her family? And, for the people who might be watching outside of Victoria, it's a pretty big name, the Gobbo name. It's
a name that's synonymous with the legal industry. As Patrick was saying, her uncle not only was a governor, he was a judge. Nicola possibly would have become a magistrate or a county court judge had she progressed at the rate that she was going. But her background wasn't as silver spoon as what sometimes is portrayed. She was from a good family and she went to a private school, but I think they were far more sort of middle class than they were upper class from her side of the family. But she obviously had a lot of intelligence, and she used that to get the marks in school to sort of proceed on to Melbourne University.
So have they got a relationship at all? You know, does she talk to her uncle, the rest of the family?
I didn't answer that. I think it's all her relationship with her sister is now pretty much non-existent, from what I understand. She has some half siblings. I don't think that there's a great deal of contact there because of the situation she's in. She's lost both parents, and the rest of the family sadly has disowned her because of the amount of media attention and how the legal industry views the conduct that she was that transpired.
Pat, over to you now. This is a question from Nick. He asks if you think that there are other lawyers out there who have also dobbed on their clients, and perhaps there are more cases that the public doesn't know about.
Look, I think the simple answer is there may be a few, but none of them were like Nicola Gobbo. This was a systematic, wholesale abuse of the justice system where the police colluded with Nicola Gobbo for years and years to get suspects put in jail for a long time. It was very organised, very carefully run. To suggest that any other lawyers may have informed, it is eminently possible that there might have been one here or there who might have given police a tip-off because they felt it was the right thing to do. They were worried that somebody was going to get murdered, and they had information that was about protecting people in those spheres. The suggestion that there's anyone else who thrived on this secret life, I think is probably a bit misleading. The other point to make is Piranha Task Force in about 2003-04, in trying to stem this gangland toll and trying to put away the baddies, sort of did a lot on the lawyers, and a lot of their lawyers, were considered to be crew members of these big criminal gangs, and were seen to be facilitating massive crimes taking place by passing messages or exchanging money or that sort of thing. And so a lot of lawyers came under the spotlight at that time. And as far as I know, nobody ever got charged with anything. Or maybe there was one or two who did later on. But basically, the idea that lawyers were informing, look, there are one or two examples we can talk about where there may have been some informing, and the Royal Commission did look at this, but nothing like Nicola Gobbo.
Chris has got a question for you, Anthony. It was one I was going to ask you as well. It's about the Hodgsons. Do you think that this inquiry will finally address who killed the Hodgsons and other unsolved underworld murders?
That's an easy one. No, it won't. It's addressed in terms of whether Nicola Gobbo has given appropriate independent advice, not only to Terence Hodgson, who would be killed in 2004, but to other people. What the great shame of this is that this particular double execution of Terence Hodgson and his wife Christine, who were both police informers, were killed. There was a light shone on police corruption in that case. There was a light shone on the relationships between Nicola Gobbo, Tony Mockbell, Paul Dale, David Michel, and others who were involved in all of this, where Nicola was the central person, sort of in the middle of them all. And it won't be solved by this Royal Commission because it's outside its terms of reference, but it might lead to more investigations into it to see how, for example, intelligence files on Hodgson's informing got out of the police station or the headquarters and into Tony Mockbell's hands, and maybe Tony Mockbell's the one who can answer it.
Pat, over to you. This question from Sarah Ann. Would you say this all happened because of police corruption or because police were just careless and even stupid in their decisions?
I think, look, the police response is very instructive. When this all sort of came out at the end of 2018, you had the then Chief Commissioner come out and basically talk about desperate times, desperate measures as a sort of explanation for what had taken place, which does sort of, it doesn't really represent the fact that Victoria Police with Nicola Gobbo turned the justice system on its head, and they did it in secret, and then they spent many, many years trying to hide it. Look, corruption comes in many forms, whether it's a brown paper bag with cash in it, or it's going about it the wrong way to get the desired result. It's probably a good point to make. If you're accused of a crime, the police have to present evidence that is admissible in a courtroom. Now, they may know that you've done it, but they can't actually just sort of confect or contrive evidence to get it over the line. And I think that's what's happened here. She sort of became a glittering prize, I think Graham Ashton described her as, that police didn't take the necessary steps to sort of use properly. If it's the term last week came out at the Royal Commission, noble cause corruption, which is basically, it's not about, filling your own pockets. It's about getting the desired result or taking baddies off the street, but going about it the wrong way. And I think that's probably, if you're going to use words like corruption, that's where you angle the discussion on this, because it wasn't police officers trying to be better off. They were just trying to get the desired result.
Well, you mentioned Graham Ashton there, Anthony. What of him now? What of Overland? What do their futures look like?
Well, since there were two sort of stories going on at the same time when this first happened in 2014 from our perspective, from the Herald Sun, and that is, you had obviously the argument about risk to life, but behind that there was always the corruption angle that could be hidden if that risk to life argument got up. And that's what we were fighting against. Was it the fact that they wanted Nicola Gobbo to be safe, or was it the fact that so much lay behind it that actually exposed the methodology and the police that had orchestrated this whole scenario, which they had reams and reams of information about how it was wrong. They'd even had reports made, and they'd never, ever handed that out. Their futures lie in the hands of, at the moment, how strong the report is that the Commissioner of the Royal Commission, Margaret McMurdo, her findings. But from then on, it gets a bit murky. It would probably take the appointment of a state prosecutor, some independent person, probably from interstate, to come into Victoria and actually compile a brief of evidence about what is, I guess Patrick and I would agree on this, that there are clear breaches of the law. It's dotted throughout and we've been saying this from day one, it's dotted throughout the reports that are already out from the Royal Commission that there are affected cases and potential pervert course of justice scenarios. So whether that ever goes any further, I have my doubts, because it would take a lot of political will to make it happen.
I mean, Pat, what of the Victorian justice system here? How does it restore its credibility? And how long might that take?
Well, the people who are most upset and enraged, I mean, we talk about the criminals who got put in jail, but you talk to any decent lawyer and they are just horrified. And if you look at the language of the High Court decision, which came down at the end of 2018, it was very plainly written. It used words like atrocious, reprehensible, to describe the behaviour. This is something that it is so foreign to the world of legal ethics and tenets, where a point of principle can sort of lead to a very long court case and a 300-page finding about abstractions that ordinary people don't really think about very often. I think the Victorian justice world is just shocked and numbed and horrified by the way it presents lawyers. And I think they have a fair point. There is no evidence that other lawyers set about doing this sort of thing. This is a one-off freak show type sort of story, really. And it's all about making sure that it won't be repeated. But I would actually argue it's very unlikely that it could be repeated because there's only one Nicola Gobbo.
a question too. This one's just come in on Nicola Gobbo. Anthony, do you reckon this would make a good Hollywood movie, and who would play Nicola Gobbo?
Australian crime stories, in my opinion, are some of the finest crime stories that have ever been made. Chopper was a brilliant film.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
You know, you've got others that have just been as good as that have gone international. I think it is a brilliant story to turn into a movie, potentially stripped back of. This is so cluttered with detail that much of it has to be stripped back to the psychology behind it. As we were sort of talking about before, this is unfortunately because the system that we all are under is an adversarial system where it's winning and losing basically between prosecutors and defence lawyers and police, and that has turned out to be a battle that really led to this. You've got bullets flying in the street, you've got convictions that have to be made, you've got promotions for police officers, you've got a lot on the line, money, budget, the rest of it, and that's how this all came together for what they call this noble cause corruption to end these kinds of notorious celebrity criminals who were going on radio back then, the likes of Williams and Mockbell, but others as well, who just didn't care what they said. They just thought they were untouchable. I think that they would have been, in the end, they would have all been put in jail regardless if you had no Nicola Gobbo. But it all came, they wanted results quickly.
Yeah, well, just on that, I mean, there's some great stoushes that Darren Hinch had with Williams.
Ghetto was one.
Yeah.
Nick Ghetto, Williams, they're all on there at one point or another, and they're all fighting with him.
Yeah, that's right. Any idea who played Nicola Gobbo?
Oh, you could have a dual role, sort of. You could have a right on my actresses. Kidman could do it. That would be a good someone who can really get into the psychology of the role. Patrick's good with actresses and actors.
Yeah, Pat.
No, I would have thought Nicole Kidman would be very good. Margot Robbie. We have talked about this at great length. I mean, we haven't really arrived at sort of answers, as you might think, but it is fun to talk about. But Asher Keddie as well would do it very well.
Has Hollywood come calling yet, guys? Anthony, to you first. Has Hollywood? Is there interest there?
There was a discussion. There's still another mini series in the works at the moment. There's writers sort of looking at it, but they did. And probably if they read the book, I'm happy for them to look at the book and see what they think of it. But there's so much more to her character that could be played out on the screen, because she's the one who told her police handlers in this special secret unit that handled her, called the SDU, that this would one day make the greatest story.
Pat, a true crime fan here asks, what's the reality of Melbourne's Gangland now? Is it all the underbelly type stuff still going on and we just don't know about it, or is it truly calmed down?
I think there's probably a lot of things going on that we don't know about. I mean, we look at Gangland in isolation as though it was this, and it was this great escalation of the underworld criminal activities and the bringing in of drugs. Now, drugs are still out there as far as I know, maybe not during the COVID crisis, but people are still taking drugs. There's a massive demand and it is incredibly lucrative. The payoff for that is that it's incredibly dangerous as well, and you might end up in jail. There was a massive underworld in Melbourne before Gangland erupted in 1999. And I've no doubt, and perhaps Anthony can furnish this further, but I've no doubt that when the likes of Tony Mockbell got put away, and Rob Karam and those types, who were responsible for the big hauls of drugs, those holes got filled very quickly. It is the law of the jungle. And there's a lot of wannabes. Carl Williams, who was the biggest Gangland figure, was a wannabe at the start of it, and he just insinuated himself in a way that led to him, potentially murdering up to 10 people and for keeping his perch. So in answer to the question, I've no doubt that there is a thriving underworld in Melbourne, as there was before Gangland, and and it will continue to be that way. And the police always have that battle to try and stem it and to try and tone it down. It's an eternal fight.
It's like that, you cut the head off a snake and another one grows back, kind of thing.
Absolutely, yes.
I did a report last week that one of Victoria's biggest meth labs had been found in regional Victoria, which shows you that nothing ever lets up in the drug world. The difference between Gangland and now, even though there's shootings now, back then you had a vendetta playing out between the Morans and the Williams, and you also had sort of a steady stream of hitmen, most notably Benji Benjamin, who was willing to kill for money and kill his mates for money as well. That made up a great deal of the toll, but there was just a lot of death surrounding it, and that's what made Gangland Gangland. These days, you more commonly get shot and survive. Not that there's not murders, there are, but it back then the vengeance seemed to sort of highlight the drug game as more than just normal times back then.
Yeah, you mentioned Carl Williams. We've got a question here from Vic who says Roberta Williams, Carl's widow, of course, used to be in the headlines frequently, but not so much now. What has become of her in recent years?
Look, she's a mother. She's trying to make her way through life. She's very upset about some of these revelations that have come out from the Royal Commission. And I think, she's very angry about a lot of things that happened and the way they went down. She personally never trusted Nicola Gobbo when Nicola Gobbo came into Carl Williams' world in the early 2000s. And to this day, she's still riled by what Nicola Gobbo did at Dakota Williams' christening back in 2003. And she argues, and Roberta argues, that Nicola Gobbo stole the limelight and the attention of that very lavish occasion by being on stage and cracking jokes about the police and that sort of thing. I think, and look, Anthony knows it better than I do. He might have a few things to say, but in her mind, she wants justice for these terrible ill doings, if you like, that may have, and the way she sees it, may have contributed to Carl Williams being killed in prison in 2010.
What do you reckon, Anthony?
I'll start off with what happened in 2010, which is Williams was murdered in the Acacia unit. At the time, he was a person that had been cooperating with police, and he was in danger. And there should have been better protections made of him for his life back then. There had been warnings that there would be retribution for what he was about to do. And his end came when it became apparent that he would not only talking to police about police corruption, but he was talking about other criminals as well. And that's what tied him up when that came up and plans were made for him to be killed. Roberta Williams is wanting to blame people in her history for any corruption. She's written a submission to the Royal Commission talking about death threats all the way through Carl Williams' 2000s when he was out in the public. These kinds of allegations will continue. We don't know exactly what was going on back then. We don't know how many police officers sort of maybe got into the ears of criminals and said, you've only got a certain amount of time left. Anyone can say anything at this point because of what has happened. And it's really hard to sort of get fact from fiction. But what we do know is that there was a series of officers in the drug squad who were corrupted back at that time, and they're the people that Roberta Williams is sort of throwing the allegations at.
Pat, we've got a question here from Georgie who asks, was it the Williams gang or the Morans? Was either side worse or more evil than the other?
Golly, that's a hard question. Look, the Morans had a lot of the playing field in this underworld drug market through the 90s. And Jason, who was killed in 2003, wasn't afraid to show menace. He carried a gun, I think, everywhere he went. And there was actually a term coined, the Moran limp, and that was for people who got shot in the leg by Jason Moran. So, look, the formidable character, as was the wider family. What sort of, accelerated this gangland process was when he shot Carl Williams in the stomach in 1999 over a perceived debt that Carl Williams owed. And that basically is the moment when this all really erupted, because Carl Williams didn't tell the police a thing, didn't dob on Jason, but decided then and there he's going to launch a jihad, in effect, against the entire Moran family. And, look, he killed Mark Moran, Jason's brother, in, I think, 2000, Jason in 2003, and then their father, I think the same year, was it Anthony?
04, just early 2004, yep.
2004. It's difficult. I mean, it's interesting. You talk about evil. It's interesting in reading Carl Williams' letters from prison later on in his life, the last sort of couple of years. He sounds like a knockabout bloke. He's trying to be funny. He's very thoughtful and considered to his friends who he's writing to. I suppose if you're going to say he's evil, and look, he may have had up to 10 people killed, it goes to the banality of evil, as the saying goes, because he didn't sound like such a bad bloke necessarily. And he'd rationalised it as well. He'd sort of, I was just protecting my family and I was doing the right thing, and this person, came in too hard and that sort of thing. Like evil's a word I'm sort of, I'm careful to apply, I suppose.
Well, I mean, Carl Williams, Anthony, he was street smart, and he was one of the early ones, wasn't he, to detect that Gobbo was a double agent?
Yeah, he's portrayed on the underbelly as being dumb, really. But it appears that he was more switched on than that. People described him, other criminals described him as very good on the phones, which mean you don't talk on the phones, careful in the way he operated, apart from the radio interviews, which I would say was not being careful, that, his phone conduct was generally pretty quiet. But in the end, he was playing a game that was too dangerous, too much attention, and that was going to end him. So I asked the question again that you wanted me to get to?
For me, yeah. Yeah, no, I was asking, he was one of the first ones to pick Gobbo. That she was a lady.
So he was able to pick up that she was being duplicitous from the fact that his crew members were turning on him, and they had the same lawyer that he did for a period of time. So because he believed that she was a crew member, she was being disloyal. He knew about conflict. He was smart enough to know about conflict. He wrote letters to the legal board, to judges. I think he might have even sent one to the chief commissioner, to the DPP, maybe even to the government. But no one listened. And what's fascinating about all this is that, well, it wasn't that hard to pick up on these conflicts and ask the question, what was going on? Because he was asking the question, Roberta was asking the question for him at times, and people pretty much dismissed it.
Question from Chris here, back to you, Pat. Now, do you think anyone has been unfairly tainted by the whole scandal?
Look, I think there's police officers who just got engulfed, if you like, by this secret of Nicola Gobbo being an informer, and they sort of had to toe the line. They had to go along with it. And I think, in listening to some of them, I won't use names, but some of the evidence of the Royal Commission, you could almost, these are the blokes who sort of helped make it happen, but you could almost feel sorry for them to the extent that they felt like they had no choice. They were just playing along with a corruption of the justice system that they sort of inherited, if you like, from case to case. And I think some of them were terribly uncomfortable with what was going on. Now, whether they're unfairly tainted, I'm not sure, in the sense that they didn't raise their hands, they didn't make it stop, they didn't bring it to the attention of people or authorities that might have make it stop. But they certainly wouldn't have chosen that path that their careers were sort of thrust upon, which was to basically give Nicola Gobbo a passport or a driver's license to wobble down the highway and collect all these criminals and put them in jail. So I can feel sympathy for them. And I think, look, everyone, I think Nicola Gobbo as a person is one of those people, and we all know them. They might have the best of intentions, but you get too close and people tend to get burned. And I think I was talking before about those Genazzano students who I know. None of them would be named, even just talking about Nicola Gobbo, because I was so fearful of the taint that would come from it. And I think that's probably true of a lot of people in this longer story, certainly.
Yeah, Anthony, a question from Maria here. Did women other than Gobbo ever get harmed or play a major role in these gangland wars?
Well, there's all of the wives for the Mockbells. There was the girlfriends. There was Danielle Maguire, who played a role in sort of meeting Tony overseas. As for other lawyers, there wasn't any other female lawyer that I can think of back then. There was obviously the Zara Gard Wilson as someone that was highlighted by police back then for her representing, coming on the scene in 2004, meeting up and becoming the solicitor and working with Nicola for a while until Zara, in fact, had her suspicions about Nicola's representation of these criminals herself.
Mm-hmm. I can see the book there behind you, Pat. It is there, Lawyer X. A question here from Danielle, who asks you both, but I'll start with you, Pat. How long did it take you to write the book?
Look, it was a real pressure cooker writing the book. I think we started at the start of last year. And what made it difficult was because the Royal Commission was releasing all this wonderful detail as it went along. And the hard part, I think, was the timing of it, to the extent that it appeared for most of last year that Nicola Gobbo, one way or another, probably wouldn't give evidence, even though the Royal Commission was very keen for her to. She eventually did give evidence in February this year. I think it was about 5 days of evidence, and that really did shape or reshape, if you like, recast a lot of her version of events. It's probably the most interesting, really. And she gave insights into, lots of things from Tony Mockbell to the Hodgson killings, and her place in it all, how she felt about it all. So that was the difficulty, was actually getting that so relatively late in the piece, and actually applying that in a way that's fair and that made sense. Would have been nice to have more time, 3 or 4 more years to read literally warehouses full of documents. I think we're both mostly blind at this point, just from reading piles of papers night after night after night.
Sorry, Pat. Danielle also asks, over to you, Anthony, what's next?
Well, we're going to watch this go through the court system for a number of years. I think Patrick and I would like to do other sort of other kinds of stories. I'm looking into other cases, not so much about lawyers duping their clients or the sort of upside down justice system that occurred back then. But there's other cases which interest me, cold cases that I'm still looking into. That's where I'm looking now.
Yeah, I mean, where do you go, Pat? Where do you go next from Lawyer X, given what you've done? You might choose a biography of a cricketer or, something.
Well, yeah, we might go on a holiday first before we do that. But Anthony, as you said, we won't give too many details, but there's another wrongful conviction that's going through the courts at the moment that Anthony, sort of in breaking that story, has made happen. And there's a potential cold case serial killer that we're looking at as well, which would be fascinating. Would be equally as fascinating, I think, as some of many aspects of this. I think we'll just get through COVID firstly, Peter. And
sure, yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah, Paul asks, Anthony, would you do a podcast?
Oh, definitely. I think I don't know if I've got the voice for it. I haven't done one except for little specials, but I think Hedley Thomas and others have done brilliant podcasts about these kinds of issues. You need obviously to get people involved, and it's not writing, it's more obviously audio, but they really do tell stories well. Those podcasts, and I know they're well listened to.
I guess we've been going for an hour now, so I'll just close by asking you both, what your lingering thought is, or how you look back. And I'll start with you, Pat. How do you reflect on, now that the book is out, on your whole experience?
Well, I think the first question people ask at a barbecue, when we're allowed to have barbecues or dinner parties or whatever, or in the pub, is, why did she do it? That is what everyone wants to say. Why did she have this double life? And I think in trying to answer that, and that's really what the book is sort of seeking to do, perhaps. We alight on Mata Hari, who was the First World War spy who got killed. Nicola Gobbo makes me think of Henry Hill, who was the informer in Goodfellas. Yeah. And I think, for me, what has happened and how it happened is infinitely interesting. But understanding why she did it, there's still question marks. There's still things that nobody could possibly know except Nicola Gobbo. So that's the lingering thought for me, is why? Because it's going to have such a sad consequence on the rest of her life, and it's going to keep the courts busy, and it's going to make many lawyers very wealthy over the next few years, I'm sure.
And what about you, Anthony? How do you look back on the whole experience, and what's your lingering thought?
Well, it was walking through a maze, turning left and right, finding new bits and pieces every step of the way. It's immensely complicated, and it's incredibly deep. The piles of informing and backwards and forwards, the fluidity of her giving police information. For example, in 2005, she becomes an informer in September. By early 2006, she's in trial from Tony Mockbell. And while she's giving information to police about that trial, it's alleged, and probably correctly, that she tells Mockbell to flee Australia because he's going to be convicted and charged with more murders. What person would do that, working for one side and then telling the person that you're trying to capture for police to actually flee, and then try and get him back during a 15-month manhunt? That's the kind of thing that was going on. And then when he gets back, continues to represent him. Unbelievable.
Amazing. It's an amazing story. And there you are, Anthony Dowsley, Pat Carline, the authors of the book, Lawyer X. You can now get that at any good bookstore around the country, and I do recommend it. It's a terrific read. Pat, Anthony, thanks for your time. And for everyone who is watching, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks.